with more information about the science skills. So let's get started. First thing you're going to see on the slide deck is the opening page. And so this just basically tells that there are these things called science skills. It tells you that they're complicated, but that you use them all the time. And then it asks you a few questions. Have you ever done this? Smelled bacon, cooked, chosen clothes to wear, made a decision? If you have, then you have done some of these science skills. They're not hard, but sometimes identifying them can be a little bit tricky. So on the first page of each of these slide decks, it tells you what to do. It says to remember to record this information in your lab book. You start with the topic and the date in the upper corner. So I have my topic here. I can get my pencil, and I'm going to write the topic. I'm going to write the date. Today is the 1st of September. It's a little bit before you're going to do it, but let's just say it's the 14th of September, or maybe it's the 17th of September, depending on what day you actually get started on this information. And then in the main ideas section, you're going to be taking notes while we look through the slide deck. If there's any vocabulary words, you're going to highlight them. There will be a page that looks like this for the vocab words. You don't need to put a definition. That's in Quizlet. But it would be good to draw a picture or put one word, some way to help you identify that vocab word so that when you see it again, you go, oh, that has to do with eyes, or that has to do with reproduction, or that has to do with cells. So we move on and we get to the first word. So we write this down in our lab book. Observe. Use your 5 senses to collect data. And so I could give you time to do that, or we could just go ahead and move on to the next screen that has some more pictures of what it means to observe. So if I would write the word observe in my lab book, I might draw an eye next to it to help me to remember. Or what I've done sometimes is I actually write the word observe and I make the O into an eyeball. So that helps you to know that observing is something that we do with our 5 senses. Now it asks a question underneath me here. It says, which one do we use the most? Well, all our words are for seeing. There's not too many words for describing smells, how they smell. We can say it smells bad, but we don't know if that means like smells bad like rotten eggs or smells bad like something else that we might think smells bad. There, if you say it's bad like rotting eggs, then everybody might think it smells like rotting eggs, but it doesn't smell like rotting eggs. It smells like rotten potatoes instead, and they have a very bad smell as well. So we use a lot of words for our eyes as we talk about observing. So if you observe this picture, it's not a stop sign. It is an octagon. It's got a white border. It's red. Has 8 sides. I mean, there's lots of things you can observe. It's on a black background. But it's not a stop sign. If you said it was a stop sign, you went to the next skill, which is infer. When you infer, you use your past experience. You use something you knew before. So you saw it and you've seen stop signs before. So you just said, oh, it looks like a stop sign. And so that was something to compare it to. And that's a great thing to do when you're learning, but sometimes it's not always correct. So just be careful. One person one time told me that it's like using your brain backwards. So I drew a brain up here. Very good drawing, a professional drawing of a brain with an arrow, meaning you use your brain backwards. You use what you've learned in the past for what you're seeing now. There we go. Now it's better. How about that? No? Well, I bet people would still stop because they just look at the color and the shape. So estimate. This is one that's pretty familiar. You're guessing the number of something. So there's a bunch of beans in a jar or a bunch of people in a crowd, and you're trying to figure out how many there are. And so you're making an estimate. It has to do with numbers, and it has to usually do with right now. So they're not going to stay long, but take a moment and see if you can guess how many buses. There's the bus. That's what you're going to see. Now, some of you said, but wait, that wasn't long enough. I couldn't see all of them. I couldn't count them all. Well, the point is that you're not supposed to count them. You're supposed to just make a guess of how many you think there were. And so the real answer was 24, but if you guessed somewhere between, let's say 18 and 30, you made a pretty good guess, and you made a very good estimate. We come now to the word predict, and the word predict means to guess, just like estimate does. But it's different because now we're not guessing about a number of something. We're guessing about something that's going to happen, an event that hasn't happened yet, something in the future. So you can predict what's going to happen, but you can estimate what's already happening and what has to do with numbers. There is one thing that you can predict and estimate, but we'll talk about that another time. So here are some prediction things. You can predict the weather. You can predict what's going to happen in sports. You might predict what's going to happen in the story that you're reading, or an experiment. You might predict the results. Although usually we don't call that a prediction. Usually we call that a hypothesis. You could even predict what we're going to talk about next. And if you were in my classroom, you'd know because the science skills are listed above the chalkboard. And you can see them and you can say, oh, hey, we already talked about observe, infer, estimate, and predict. And you would know that the next word was measure. Now, these last 5 actually, science skills, we're not going to talk about too much today because each one of those are topics that we're going to go a little bit deeper in as we go through the rest of this unit. We're going to spend some time with measuring, showing about the units and the tools. We're going to talk more about classification and how living things are classified in groups. We're going to look at hypothesize. Hypothesize means to make a hypothesis. And so we're going to be doing an experiment and seeing how we actually hypothesize. We're going to make charts and graphs. We're going to organize things. When you wrote things in your lab book, you were recording and organizing. And then we're also going to analyze when we do our experiment. You're going to take your charts and your graphs and you're going to look at them and try to figure out what it actually means, what those numbers, that data that you collected, what does that mean? And how can we use that to figure out where to go from there or what that means for the experiment that we did, whether it's an experiment that we tested that was a big, huge experiment or just something that we tested in life. So you have your information. You have each one of the science skills listed in the main ideas and concepts part. Now it's your time to write 3 to 5 questions that you might see on a quiz about this topic. So for instance, you might write down, what does it mean to infer? It'd be a pretty simple question. You could look back through the slide deck. You could find the answer. You could find the definition. You might also say something like that would be a little bit more difficult, such as, when you're guessing the number of jelly beans in a container, which science skill are you using? A little bit more difficult, but you still could look back and you could say, oh, that's when you're guessing the number of something. That's estimate. You could move on to even harder questions like, what's the difference between estimate and predict? Or even what's the difference between observe and infer? So any of those types of questions you could use for this quiz that you're writing. You don't need to write the answers, just the questions. But come up with 3 to 5 questions about the topic we covered. I just gave you a few that you could use. Shh, don't tell anybody. At the bottom of the page, you want to write one of 2 things. If there's something you still don't understand about the science skills, you need to list it there. And it might be a question, or it might just say, I really just am completely confused about what it means to observe. Or if you look through this slide deck and you're like, I got it, I understand those skills, they're pretty clear, I don't really have any questions, then you write, I understood everything today. Or if it took you 2 days to do this, you could say, I just understood everything in this slide deck, and that would be basically the same thing. So those are the science skills. That is what a slide deck looks like, and that's how you use it. As you go through, you think about it, you talk about it. You might even grab your mom or your dad or your brother or your grandma, or I don't know, your dog might not be so interested, but you could talk about the slide deck to your dog as you go through it and explain each page to your dog, and that would help you to learn it. So thanks for being with me as we look through the science skills, and I will see you again when we move on to our next section called measurement.